Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
I was in awe of the Gothic splendor of the main hall of the Wills Memorial Building, a magnificent place, unfortunately funded by the proceeds of tobacco and, indirectly, the slave trade. We filed out into the bright Bristol sunshine and I was joined by my son, William, whose graduation ceremony I had attended. I shook his hand and congratulated him on his master's degree. Being a very proud dad, I had to have photographs of him in his ceremonial robes. I moved around to get the sun behind me and managed to snap a few shots before Will's cheerful expression changed. "What the hell is he doing here?" he said. I turned to see a Rolls-Royce standing at the side of the road. Its chauffeur was arguing with a traffic warden. In front of the rollers stood a man of slight build, about 5 foot 10 inches tall with gray hair and piercing blue eyes. At 60 years of age, he was 15 years older than me and the man I'd least like to find at my son's graduation. I moved towards him, but Will was ahead of me, striding across the pavement towards the interloper. "What are you doing here? I don't need you, and I don't want you here. Get back in your car and go back to London." The man put both his hands in front of him, palms towards William in a conciliatory gesture. "Relax, young man. Just calm down. I've seen what I came for. Now I need a quick word with your father, and I'll leave you to your celebrations." I put my hand on Will's shoulder. "It's okay, son. I can deal with this. You get off to your champagne reception and make sure you save me a glass." Will turned and went back to his friends who stood with puzzled looks on their faces. He would obviously have some explaining to do. Most of his mates would know that Will was arguing with Terry Sanford, but few, if any, would know the reason. "Is this it, Sanford? No lawyers, no Minders, just you?" "This is it, Mr. Jennings. Just me. I've given up talking to lawyers where you're concerned. It does me no good at all. I just want to talk to you. Just me and you man to man. I'm not aware that we have anything left to discuss. Please, Mr. Jennings. I'm not a man who is used to begging, but if that's what it takes. Here, take my card. We'll meet anywhere you choose. We have mutual interests, and we need to work out how to go forward. I don't need to call you. The Clifton Sausage, 7 p.m. You're buying," I said angrily. "I'll book the table. I'm sure your chauffeur will find it for you." I turned and walked off to join Will in his celebrations. I hadn't seen Terence Sanford in almost 9 years, and I'd hoped that I would never see him again. After only 16 years of marriage, my darling Vicky was taken from me as a result of cervical cancer. Her death left me devastated, not knowing which way to turn. It had taken a year for the disease to take her from me, yet it still came as a shock when she eventually died. I tried to tell myself that it was an end to her suffering, and that it was better that her battle had not dragged out any longer. However, none of that stopped me wanting to keep her just that little bit longer. Every day I longed to wake up and see her face, even as thin as she'd become. The days dragged by, and slowly I came back to the land of the living. I had a 12-year-old son and a daughter of only 10, so falling into a morass of self-pity was not an option. I had some help from Vicky's sister Madeline, who was with us at the end and stayed for another 2 weeks. After that, my mother did her best, but Mom was torn between me and Dad, who was himself not well. No matter how long you live with someone, there are always some surprises when they die. Mine came in the form of a savings account she told me about once when the end was near. She told me to take the death certificate to the bank and I would automatically get access to the account. She didn't tell me that the account contained more than £40,000, enough to pay off the mortgage on our house. By the first anniversary of Vicky's death, we were starting to get back on our feet. I couldn't face the idea of my children becoming latchkey kids, so I quit my job and started working from home as a consultant. Both Will and his sister Zoe did their best to pull their weight around the house, and I tried my best to be both mom and dad to them. Our house was filled with love, but we all knew there was someone missing. Every night the words of Sting would come home to me. "The bed's too big without you," he sang, and I couldn't hear it without crying. Almost 15 months after Vicky's death, the letter arrived. At first I thought it was a sick joke, then I thought it was a scam. It purported to come from a company of solicitors in London. I studied it. I even showed it to Will. We looked up the solicitors on the internet, and they seemed to be genuine. The wording seemed extremely vague. "Mr. Vaughn Jennings, husband to the late Victoria Jennings. You are invited to ring these offices," quoting the reference number above. "If you do so, you may learn something to your advantage." I was mystified. Did Vicky have had another secret account? Neither Will nor I saw any trap in it, so I rang the office of Wallace and Simpkins. As soon as I gave them the reference, I was put through to a Mr. Anthony Johnston. "Mr. Jennings, you are the husband of the late Victoria Jennings?" "Yes, I am. What has this got to do with Vicky?" "Are you familiar with the name of Terence Sanford, Mr. Jennings?" There can't be many people who haven't heard of him, but of course I have. Vicky used to work for him when we lived in Sunbury. Thank you, Mr. Jennings. It seems that you are the man we need to talk to. Unfortunately, this is a matter that can't be dealt with over the phone. Could you come into our office so that we can discuss it? We'll pay you full expenses including loss of earnings, irrespective of the outcome. I realized I couldn't lose, so I made an appointment. I arranged for Will and Zoe to go to Mum's in case I was late getting home, and on Wednesday morning I set off for London. My experience was that solicitors always kept you waiting, much to my surprise. I was shown into Johnston's office as soon as I arrived. Anthony Johnston was a tall, well-built man in his 50s. I sized him up as he came across the room to meet me. I guess 6'2", a little taller than me. Broad-shouldered, I could imagine him playing rugby in his youth. He had brown eyes, salt and pepper hair, a square jaw with a cleft chin. He was probably the sort of man who had no trouble finding lady friends. He offered his hand and I shook it. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Jennings. Thank you for coming. Please take a seat." He guided me towards a chair and returned to his desk. "Before we start, I must point out that in cases like this, we like to record our interviews." He pointed to a video camera fixed to the ceiling in the corner of his office. "Is that okay with you?" "Cases like what? I still don't know why I'm here." "Cases which involve substantial amounts of money, with conditions attached. It helps us prove to our client that we have explained everything correctly. So are you okay with the recording?" "Yes, I suppose so." "Thank you. Now let's get down to business. I represent the interests of Mr. Terence Sanford." "Sanford?" I'd have thought with his money he'd get the senior partner on his case. Mr. Wallace, at least. Both the Wallaces are long since dead, I'm afraid. I am the senior partner. Now, if I may continue? I nodded for him to continue. "As you may have read in the papers, Mr. Sanford recently lost his 2 sons in a boating accident in Acapulco. This means your wife's children are his sole surviving blood relations." "What are you talking about? My wife's children? You mean my children, my William and my Zoe." "My children? Nothing to do with Sanford." I was starting to get irritated. "Oh dear. I'm sorry, Mr. Jennings. Mr. Sanford said that you were aware of the situation." I got out of the chair and leaned across the desk. We were almost nose to nose when I spoke. "Just what situation would that be? You slimy piece of shit. What are you trying to say about my wife?" I had to give him credit for the fact that he never backed away. He remained remarkably cool, but then it wasn't his wife that was being insulted. "Will you please sit down, Mr. Jennings, and I'll do my best to explain." I fell back into the chair and let him continue. "Mr. Sanford has sworn an affidavit to the effect that for the last 2.5 years of her employment, he and your wife carried on a sexual relationship. He thought you knew, and that was why you moved to Somerset." "Mr. Johnston, I'm trying to stay calm here, but if you continue to cast aspersions on my wife's character, I won't be responsible for my actions. Now can you get to the point of why you've got me here?" "I'm trying to do that, Mr. Jennings. Had I known that you were unaware of all this, I would have been better prepared. To get to the point, Mr. Sanford alleges that both William and Zoe are his biological children. He believed that it was quite right for the children should be with their mother. Now Mrs. Jennings has passed. He feels that as their biological father, he is best placed to care for them." "Never!" I shouted. I slammed my fist down on Johnston's desk so hard that his pins leapt off the desk. I got out of the chair and started pacing up and down in the office. "He can't do this. Look, I'm sorry about his boys. I know how it feels to lose a loved one, but just because he's lost his family doesn't mean he can steal mine." I was losing it. That's what the pacing was all about, trying to control my aggression. How is any of this supposed to be to my advantage? Just tell me that. "I'm coming to that, Mr. Jennings. Mr. Sanford appreciates the way you have cared for his children over the years. As a token of his appreciation, he is prepared to settle on you the sum of £300,000. "You what? You mean he thinks he can buy my children? Well, tell him screw off and peddle his lies somewhere else. My children are not for sale." Johnston tried to stand between me and the door. I pushed him aside. I'd almost reached the door when it opened and I came face to face with him for the first time. Sanford closed the door behind him. I should have known better than to send a boy to do a man's job. "Just sit down, Johnston, and let me deal with this." He turned to face me. "Now listen to me, Jennings. I may not have had the benefit of your education, but even I can count to 9. Neither of those kids was early. They were both spot on time. You can try and fight me on this and end up with nothing, or you can give up now and walk away with 300 grand. You are not taking my children. I don't care how much money you've got. I'll fight you every inch of the way. Be sensible about this. You know I can give them a much better life. It's not as if you'll never see them again." I'm sure we can work something out. Just get out of my life. Look, if it's the money, I can make it $500,000. He couldn't have said a worse thing. I lunged at him, grabbed the front of his shirt, and pulled him towards me. I wouldn't sell my kids to you for any amount of money, I shouted. Now take your money and get out of our lives. I pushed him away. He stumbled and fell as I stormed out of the office. All the way home, I was in complete turmoil. The arrogance of the man amazed me. To think he could step in and buy a family. He must be mad. As some of the heat went out of my anger, I started to think about what Johnston had said. It couldn't be true. I found the idea of Vicky having an affair for 2.5 years to be totally preposterous. I would have known. I tried to think back to that time in our lives. Were there any telltale signs that Vicky was cheating on me? The allegations were still whirling through my head when I arrived at Mum's to pick up the children. Will had told her all about the letter, so she had to quiz me on the events of the day. Well, what did they want? Was it worth your while? It was a waste of time, Mum, so no, it wasn't worth my while. But they said it would be to your advantage. Well, it wasn't. I snapped back at her. But the expenses covered your costs? I didn't claim them, all right? Now just leave it, Mum. Can't I be concerned for my son without being snapped at? I'm sorry, Mom. I guess I'm a bit cheesed off. I'll be okay tomorrow. I hope Will and Zoe haven't been any trouble. They're never any trouble. We love having them, you know that. The talk of the children brought tears to my eyes. I tried hard to disguise it as I gathered up the children's belongings, but I guess there's no fooling your mother. The concerned look she gave me as I left told me I'd been unsuccessful. The children hadn't been in bed long when the phone rang. It was Vicky's sister Madeline. Vaughn, how are you? I'm fine, Maddie. How about you? That's not what your mother says. She's worried about you. What happened today, Vaughn? Bloody Sanford, the bloke she used to work for. He claims the kids are his. There was a silence at the other end of the phone. Maddie, are you still there? Yes, sorry, Vaughn. Can I come over to talk to you tomorrow? I've got something for you. I tried to get more out of her, but she was having none of it. I had no option but to wait. At 10 a.m. the following day, I found Maddie waiting on my doorstep. I invited her in and made some coffee. We sat at the dining room table drinking coffee while I waited for Maddie to produce whatever it was she had to give me. Vaughn, you know I love you, don't you? Not in the same way that Vicky did, but enough to want to protect you from things that might hurt you or the children. Of course I do, Mads. You've been a great help to us over the last year. We're really grateful to you for all you've done. I'm sure Vicky would be pleased. Well, there was something else she asked me to do that perhaps I should have done a little sooner. Before she died, Vicky wrote you a letter. She knew you would be struggling after she'd gone, so she asked me to hold on to it until I thought you could cope. I'm sorry, but I should have given you this before. She handed me a white envelope. I opened it and took out the letter inside. As I unfolded the letter, I caught sight of her handwriting and tears came to my eyes. Maddie squeezed my arm as a comforting gesture as I unfolded the letter and started to read. My dearest V, if you are reading this, then I am dead and Maddie believes you have recovered. I want to tell you that our years together have been the happiest time of my life. When we married, I fully expected to grow old with you and nothing would have made me happier. Seeing you with Will and Zoe did my heart good and confirmed my belief that you would always be the man I wanted to be with. You were a great support to me right up to the end, and that makes what I have to tell you all the more difficult. I'm sad to say that I don't deserve the love you gave me. Had I not died, I would never have revealed my secret. I know how much it will hurt you. Now that I'm not there, it is essential for you to know, and I want it to come from me and not as a surprise. For 2.5 years prior to our leaving Sunbury, I had an affair with my boss Terrence Sanford. It was not just sex. I'm not like that. I did love him, but you must believe, not in the same way I love you. During my time with him, I got to see a side of him that others don't. He can be kind and generous and not at all like the ruthless businessman he appears to be. We were only together when we were away on business, and you were never a part of that. We never spoke of you when we were together, and he was never with me when I called you. It was like two separate lives. In one life, it was fancy restaurants, Versace dresses, Gucci bags, and Jimmy Choo shoes. In the other, I had my wonderful man working to build us a future and making me feel special. It started before William was born, and I ended it when I returned to work after having Zoe. During that time, his relationship with his wife got worse, and when I returned to work, he said he was going to leave her and wanted me to marry him. That was never an option, my love. I chose you and our life together over life with a man more rich and powerful than I have ever known. Please remember that, my love. After your anger has died down and you've got over the shock, remember I chose you. Now I come to the really hard part. The part I'm too much of a coward to tell you in person. I think he is the biological father of our children. I really wanted them to be yours, but when their eyes never turned brown, I began to have doubts. I've never told him any of this. You are their father, the one they love, and who has always loved them. It breaks my heart to tell you this. I know how much it will hurt, but you have to know. One day you might need to find blood relatives, and I want you to know where to look. I pray that one day you will be able to forgive me. I'm so sorry and ashamed for what I've done, and since we moved down here to Somerset, I've tried to be the wife you deserved. Now I'm being taken from you, and perhaps that is my punishment. I wish a wonderful life for you and our children. You are still a young man, and too good a man to be left on his own. I pray you'll find someone who will be a better wife than me. Goodbye, my love. Have a wonderful life, and always remember I love you. Vicky. The tears were running down my cheeks as I finished the letter. Maddie began dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. I read it again and a third time. The tears stopped and I just sat there. Vaughn, are you all right? I sat with my head in my hands. So that's it. It's all true. Why would she do this to me? She gives me 2 children, knowing someone is waiting to snatch them away from me. How could anyone do that and still claim to love me? She did love you, Vaughn. Writing that letter was the hardest thing she ever had to do. And you knew. All that sympathy and helping out while all the time you were laughing at the gullible fool. Bringing up another man's children and he doesn't know. It wasn't like that. We never laughed at you. She loved you, and I was jealous of what you two had together. I didn't know anything until she gave me that letter. She only let me read it so that I could gauge when would be a good time to give it to you. Well, that's it then. Just got to sit and wait for him to come for them. What do you mean come for them? Who is going to come for them? Haven't you listened to anything I told you? He's going to take them. Sanford's going to take them from me. I don't understand. How can he take them? He doesn't even know. Of course he knows. What do you think yesterday was all about? He offered me $500,000 if I didn't fight his paternity and custody suit. Tell me you didn't accept. Please, Vaughn, tell me. Don't be stupid, Mads. Of course I didn't accept, but he'll take them anyway. Who would you award custody to? On one side, an unrelated, self-employed consulting engineer with no support network to speak of. On the other, their biological father who can give them anything they want and can pay for any level of support. We'll fight him. I'll help you in any way I can. I'm sure we can make the court see they would be better off with you. Please don't blame Vicky. She didn't expect this to happen. I know how much she loved you. Yeah, doesn't change the fact that she brought all this about. Doesn't change the fact she cheated on me and was busy sleeping with her boss. I'm glad she is dead. Calm down, and we'll make plans to deal with this. The first thing to do is to find a solicitor. We need one that specializes in family law. We can do this, Vaughn. Really, we can. Like her sister, Maddie was always optimistic. She and her husband, Robert, did their best for me, and we nearly pulled it off. Within 2 weeks of my visit to London, I received a summons to take the children to a clinic for paternity test. My solicitor had advised that fighting the test would be a waste of time and money. He was right, of course. Fighting at that stage would have made it look like I had something to hide. After Vicky's letter, I thought I was prepared for the result. I was wrong. No matter how often I told myself that the result will go against me, I secretly hoped it wouldn't be true. When the results came back, all that hope was taken away, and I slipped into a deep depression. My carefully preserved air of normality disintegrated. If it hadn't been for Maddie, Mom, and the children, I would have given up. Maddie realized I couldn't speak about her sister without falling apart, so she volunteered to explain everything to the children. Will was adamant there was no way he was leaving me, no matter what happened. 2 weeks later that I received a summons to attend the family court for a custody hearing. The family court is an unusual affair. It has its own special judges and is held in a committee room. Nothing that happens in that room is ever made public, and anyone disclosing any of the discussions can be prosecuted for contempt. On the day of our hearing, Sanford had 2 legal representatives, one of whom was Johnston. Social services and children's services were represented along with me and my solicitor. It seemed ridiculous to me then, and it still does, that the 2 people whose future was to be decided were not allowed to attend. Johnston and his deputy presented their case, that the children should be with their biological father. They outlined all the advantages the children would receive by living with Sanford. My man told the court that I was the only father they had ever known, and that it would be extremely traumatic to take them away from a loving father. I could see from the faces around the table that he was having the desired effect. I began to have real hope. Unfortunately, Sanford's team could see the same thing I did. When asked if he had anything to add, Johnston stood up and addressed the court. The court has been told what a good job Mr. Jennings and his wife have made of bringing up the children. This is true, and my client is very appreciative. However, that was when there were two parents. Since the death of Mrs. Jennings, more pressure has been placed on Mr. Jennings. Unfortunately, Mr. Jennings seems to have developed a propensity for violence as a means of dealing with that pressure. I would like to show the court some extracts from a recording of the interview my client and I had with Mr. Jennings. He opened up a file on his laptop, and the picture appeared projected onto the back wall of the room. This recording of a meeting we had with Mr. Jennings to discuss this matter. I made Mr. Jennings aware that the meeting was being recorded. The first scene was me grabbing the front of Johnston's shirt and going head-to-head with him. Then there was me thumping the desk, jumping up and pacing up and down the office. Finally came the bit with me pushing Sanford in the chest, sending him sprawling on the floor. My solicitor tried to stop me as I sprung to my feet. It didn't happen like that. That meeting was a goddamned ambush. The judge repeatedly told me to sit down, and eventually I did. Johnston continued. Mr. Jennings cannot cope, and my client does not feel the children would be safe in his care. I looked around the table and realized I'd lost all the ground my solicitor had gained. The panel retired to consider a verdict, but I already knew the outcome. It only took them 30 minutes to decide that within 10 days I would hand over my children to the social services, who would in turn take them to Sanford. There can be no appeal against the decision of a family court, so all I could do was to make the most of the time we had together. Will wanted to run away so he wouldn't be there to be collected, but I pointed out that would result in me being jailed for contempt. On the day of their collection, there were tears all round. As I hugged them both, William stepped back and looked at me. He will never be my father. As soon as I can, I'll be back. I love you, Dad. Zoe kissed me and assured me she loved me and would do whatever it took to get back home. After they'd gone, I looked around the house. She was still there. Vicky had family pictures everywhere, and she seemed to be in all of them. Not surprising, really. I took most of them. I thought about cutting her out of them, but only for a second. Will might understand, but Zoe certainly wouldn't. The court ordered Sanford to make provision for visiting, but I couldn't bring myself to follow it up. As things turned out, I didn't need to. Within 3 weeks, both of them stood on my doorstep. It seemed that Sanford's idea of caring for and educating them was to send them off to boarding school. Will ran away, went straight to get Zoe, and they made their way back home. Of course, the police paid us a visit later that day, and the following morning social services came to take them away again. They were smart kids, so the next time they didn't come to me but went to Mom and Dad. We had 3 days together that time. Following that, it was to Maddie and Robert they went to. The police threatened me with a charge of abduction, but as I pointed out, I didn't go and get them, and I couldn't stop them coming to me. When Maddie leaked the story to the press, the social services came under a great deal of pressure. They were not allowed to disclose anything that happened in court, and so couldn't defend themselves. By the end of the summer term, both children had managed to get back to me 4 times. All this time, my solicitor tried, without success, to get another hearing. During the summer break, Sanford whisked the children off to Mauritius for a holiday. This ruled out any more runaways. They kept in touch by phone and Skype, but I missed them terribly. When Will told me he had a plan, I urged him not to do anything stupid or illegal. He just laughed and told me not to worry. All the efforts made by myself, Maddie, and my solicitor got us nowhere. It came as a surprise when I was summoned to appear before the family court at the beginning of September. My surprise turned to shock when I found out the hearing was not to charge me with contempt, but to reconsider the original verdict. It seemed social services thought insufficient emphasis had been placed on what the children wanted. Sanford was only represented by Johnston, and he seemed remarkably subdued. We all sat there looking at each other until the judge called the meeting to order. I was under strict instructions from my solicitor to remain calm. Once the preliminaries were out of the way, the judge turned to me. Mr. Jennings, at the last meeting of this court, you demanded sole custody of William and Zoe. Is that still your position? It is, ma'am. You would not consider joint custody? No, ma'am. It would be too disruptive. Whatever the court decides, it would be best for the children to have only one father. I believe that father should be me. The social services spokesman told the court that during the interviews with the children, it became obvious they wanted to stay with me. Their actions since the previous court decision underlined that. The judge turned to Johnston. Mr. Johnston, during the previous hearing, you claimed Mr. Jennings had a propensity for violence. She actually read this last phrase from the transcript of the meeting. Mr. Sanford was concerned for the safety of the children if they remained with Mr. Jennings. Is that still the case? No, ma'am, it is not. I rocked back in my chair, unable to believe what I had just heard. Would you care to explain what brought about this change of heart? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Sanford accepts that both children want to live with Mr. Jennings, and he doesn't believe they would feel that way if he were violent towards them. He suggested we give the entire recording of the meeting to a psychologist for evaluation. The court has a copy of the psychologist's report. In short, ma'am, the report concludes that Mr. Jennings had no idea his wife had an affair with my client, or that the children were a result of the affair. The psychologist is of the opinion that Mr. Jennings was in a state of shock, and his reactions were those of a man defending his family. Are you saying you willfully mislead the court? We did not try to mislead the court, ma'am. However, we do believe we were guilty of misinterpreting Mr. Jennings' reaction. My solicitor looked at me with a huge grin on his face. I was mystified. Everything Johnston said about me was correct, but why the sudden change of heart? He'd had no worries about misrepresenting the situation before. My client has no objection to Mr. Jennings having custody, but demands visitation rights. The judge turned to me. Do you agree to this, Mr. Jennings? No, ma'am, I do not. My children have been badly scarred by the events of the last 4 months. Being forced to spend time with the man they see as responsible for all of that is only going to inhibit the healing process. My solicitor was pulling at my arm, trying to get my attention. He was mouthing the words, "Quit while you're winning." I turned back to the judge. I am prepared to allow visits by Mr. Sanford, but only at the request of my children. Are you saying you'd refuse to accept the children if Mr. Sanford is granted access? If Mr. Sanford were a reasonable man, I would have no problem, ma'am. However, he has shown himself to be anything but reasonable. His behavior so far has shown he is a man who is prepared to go to any length to get what he wants. If you grant him access, I expect to be back in court every time my arrangements do not fit in with his. My children need stability. Giving Mr. Sanford the right to interfere will damage that stability. The judge looked at Johnston, who just waved her away. She told us she would retire to consult further with social services. My solicitor wanted me to change my mind about access. He saw that as a deal breaker. I was confident something had happened to make Sanford change his mind, and that lack of access would not be a problem. The court reconvened an hour later. Once everyone was sitting down, the judge called us back to order. I have reached a decision, she said. Despite Mr. Jennings' unusual attitude to access, I am awarding him sole custody of William and Zoe. Social services will monitor the situation. She turned to me. Be warned, Mr. Jennings. If I ever find out you are preventing your children from visiting Mr. Sanford, I will have you back in this court before you know what is happening. That was 9 years ago, and I'd not seen anything of Sanford since then. Neither Will nor Zoe had ever expressed any desire to see him. He did send birthday cards and presents for them. He sent Will a check for £1,000 for his birthday. I sent it back with a note saying he should send something more appropriate for a 13-year-old boy. After that, things got better. More sensible gifts arrived, and I always made them write thank you notes. Other than gifts and cards, he left us alone. As the years went by, Maddie and Mum worked on me. It wasn't right for the children to grow up with me hating their mother. Maddie kept reminding me that Vicky had the chance of having it all. She could have divorced you, taken the children, and had a life of luxury. Instead, she turned her back on all of that and moved here with you. Doesn't that tell you anything? As Zoe got older, she started to ask me more about her mother. What was she like when we were young? What did she like to do? It's hard telling a young girl that her mother was a slag, so I gilded the lily a bit. Slowly but surely it had an effect on me. There's a limit to the amount of hate you can carry for a dead person. The good memories started to return, and they outweighed the memory of what she had done. Being both mom and dad to a couple of teenagers while trying to earn a living kept me pretty busy. Too busy to worry about people like Terrence Sanford. As I walked through the streets of Clifton, I puzzled why would Sanford turn up here and now? Both children were of an age to make all their own decisions. They may not be financially independent, but they were independent in every other way. I couldn't see what I had to offer him. I arrived at the restaurant and went in. Once inside, I was asked for my name, and when I gave it, I got another surprise. Yes, Mr. Jennings, your guest has arrived. Let me take you to your table. The Clifton Sausage is a small boutique restaurant in Clifton Village. It was Will's favorite place, specializing, as it did, in his favorite food, sausages. I'd chosen the place because for me it was home ground, and I hoped it would make Sanford less than comfortable. I got straight to the point. So Sanford, what's this all about? The children are all grown up now. They make their own decisions. Neither of us can make them do anything, so why are you talking to me and not them? Vaughn, you don't mind me calling you Vaughn, do you? Vaughn's fine. Thank you, and you can call me Terry. I nodded to him. Okay, Vaughn, what you say is correct, but you can still help me if you choose to. I want to help them, Vaughn. I can open doors. I can make sure they want for nothing, but I can't make them accept my help. Well, that makes two of us. But you can help. Look, Vaughn, I stuffed up big time 9 years ago. I tried to treat it like a business deal. I got the best lawyers, made you an offer I thought you couldn't refuse. I won the day, but I couldn't make them love me, quite the reverse. Anything they wanted, I gave them, but they still hated me. Is that why you caved in? I caved in, as you put it, because of the actions of our son. Our son? Well, the tests prove that I am his biological father, but I accept you are the one they call Dad. William brought that home to me with a vengeance. Our meals arrived, and we started to eat. Sanford was surprised that he was really enjoying his meal. He made several appreciative noises as we ate. So tell me, Terry, what did William do to change your mind? Well, I was happy to let them keep running away. The police would always bring them back. I expected them to change their minds after the holiday. However, when the time came to go back to school, William refused to go. The night before the start of term, we had a row about it. I told him, "I'm your father, and you'll do as I say." He looked at me with real hatred in his eyes. "You're not my father. You're just a man who had sex with my mother." It was the mention of Victoria in that way that made me slap his face. Just a slap, you understand. I just lashed out, and I did it in front of my staff. Will took himself off to his room. The next day, the chauffeur, who should have been taking them to school, came to find me. He said I should see them before they left for school. I went out to find William had a black eye, so bad he couldn't see out of it. I asked him how he came by it. "You did it," he said. "Everyone saw you." I swear to you, Vaughn, it was an open-handed slap I gave him. He'd hurt himself in order to blame it on me. He told me I didn't want to know where Zoe had bruises. He was going to set me up as a child abuser. I saw how determined he was, and I just knew people would believe him. In a way, I was proud of him. He'd beaten me, so I gave in. He got what he wanted. Now I accept it was the right thing for both of them. Well, that's something he never told me. Sounds like he's more devious than I thought. He takes after me in that respect. Like I said, I was proud of him. He knew what he wanted and was prepared to do whatever it took to get it. We finished our meals still talking about the children. Much to my surprise, I found myself warming to the man. I even started to feel a little sorry for him when he told me about the way his marriage had broken up following the death of his sons. The divorce cost me an arm and a leg, but it was the right thing to do. Without the boys, there was nothing left to bind us together. I was still in love with Victoria. Sorry, perhaps I shouldn't talk about her, but it wasn't just the boss taking advantage of his PA. I really did love her, and I thought she loved me. She did. She left me a letter. I didn't get it until after I met you in London. She told me all about it. She told you I wanted to marry her. I nodded. That's another battle I lost. I really expected you to stay in Sunbury, especially after GKN offered you promotion. My mouth fell open in surprise. Don't look so shocked, Vaughn. I didn't want to lose her. If that meant leaning on a few people to make sure your employer made it almost impossible for you to leave, then so be it. That's why I was convinced you knew about me. Why else would you turn down an offer like that? You won't be surprised to find out that I was tempted. It would have made a big difference to our family, but Vicky assured me we could manage and urged me to do what would make me happiest. I guess that had something to do with you also. Few people had ever seen what I saw that evening. The millionaire industrialist Terence Sanford with tears in his eyes. He used a handkerchief to dry them. What do you say I settle up here, and we go somewhere and get a proper drink? I indicated my approval, and in 5 minutes we were walking down the hill to a large pub with a huge terrace at the rear. We went straight through to the garden and bought our pints at the terrace bar. The pub owed much of its popularity to the excellent view of the Clifton Suspension Bridge. I love to look at that bridge, so I found us a table facing it. I sat with him, both drinking beer now and enjoying the warm evening air. "You done a good job with them," Sanford said, his speech now reflecting his humble origins. "The kids, I mean. My people told me you'd struggle, you being on your own and all. Let him falter," they said. "Then when he does, you can step in and offer to help." The problem is you didn't falter. William has graduated with first-class honors and Zoe is well on the way. I've got to hand it to you, Vaughn. It wasn't hard, they're good kids. They made it easy for me. They take after their mother. You still miss her, don't you? Every hour of every day. It didn't make any difference, me and her, I mean. It did for a while. If she'd been alive when I found out, it might have been different. It's hard to hate someone who's dead, especially when she's left you 2 children to bring up. Besides, Will has enough hate for both of us. I got a bit of that when he was with me. He's not mellowed then? He has. His sister is still working on him. Seeing you today didn't help. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But if I tried to make an appointment, you would have refused to see me. It's nothing personal, but why don't you get to the point? Tell me what you want from me while we are both sober enough to deal with it. Okay, I want to talk to them. I don't need your approval for that, but they need to know that it's all right with you. I got it so wrong the last time that they may see talking to me as a betrayal of you. They need you to tell them that you're happy with it, or they won't listen to me. One day they'll both be very rich, but why should they wait until I'm dead when I can help them now? Please, Vaughn. I know you want what's best for them. Help me do this. I sat sipping my beer, gazing at the bridge and thinking about what he'd said. He was right, of course. I wanted them to have the best start in life. Why should I stand in the way of the man who could give it to them? Because he screwed my wife, that's why. That was years ago, Vaughn. Why should your children suffer for the actions of two other people? While this argument was going on in my head, my gaze was fixed on the bridge and his was fixed on me. It'll have to be on my terms. I'll talk to them and set up your first meeting. After that, it's up to them. A smile spread across his face. Whatever you want. This calls for a celebration. Finish your beer and I'll get the brandies in. I don't remember much more about that night. I do remember stumbling out of Sanford's roller and being helped to my front door by the chauffeur. He even opened my front door for me when I had difficulty finding the keyhole. I recall the words I said, or should I say slurred, as I left Sanford. Now look, Terry, I may be pissed, but that doesn't mean we're mates. I've said I'll help you and I will, but that doesn't make us mates. Nah, course not. I mean, I'm an arrogant a-hole, and you're a good bloke? That's what you were, Vaughn. You are a good bloke. How could we possibly be mates? I've done my best for them. I told her. I hope it was good enough. I'm sorry about Will. Give him time. I'm sure he'll forgive you, the way I have. I wouldn't have told either of them until much later, but Sanford had to stick his or in. It was the wrong time for Will. I've met him again recently, Sanford that is, but you probably know that already. I'm afraid I got more than a little drunk. If circumstances were different, I might even like him. Not now, though. I'm always aware that he had a part of you that should have been mine alone. I should have known I'd find you here. The voice from behind suddenly made me aware of my daughter's presence. Sorry, I forgot the anniversary. What is it now, 11 years? I nodded. I was on my knees tending the grave, and as I looked up at her, she looked so much like her mother that it brought tears to my eyes. She can't hear you, Daddy. She's gone. You have to accept that. I do, but it helps me to talk to her. How did it go with Sanford last night? You talked to him, got a few things straightened out? I suppose so. To tell the truth, it was all a bit weird. He tried really hard. He has a certain charm. He was extremely complimentary about you, which was a good job, really. Will would have decked him if he'd said anything bad. But you got everything sorted out? You know where you stand with each other? Yes, I think so. I told him he can give up any thoughts of leading me down the aisle. That right belongs to my daddy. My children will never call him Grandpa. Will still doesn't like him, but he won't shut him out. We agreed that he could be like an uncle. I think that's about as close as we are comfortable with. I stood up and hugged her, and she kissed my cheek. Now, Daddy dear, we've done something you wanted. You must do something we want. Okay, what do you want me to do? Move on, Dad. Mom's been gone for 11 years now and our house still looks the same. If you ever took a date back here, all she'd see are family pictures and a house that hasn't changed in the last 11 years. It wouldn't really tell her there was any future in a relationship with you. You don't have to forget about her. Just make room for someone else. It's such a waste. Lots of good women are longing for a man like you. Give them a chance. It's not right for you to be alone. It brought tears to my eyes hearing my daughter speak about me this way. You make it sound like I've set up some sort of shrine, and it's not like that at all. I hated what your mother did, but it was important that you had a positive image of her. Talking to you about the good times made me realize that the 10 years I had with her after the affair were worth a lot more than teach a time I was sharing her with Sanford. So yes, I forgave her. As you two grew up and I was on my own more and more, I really missed her. This is the time we planned for. I started coming here to talk to her. As for the house, I'm a man. We don't take much notice of our surroundings. I'd never really considered other women as they were growing up. Working at home, I never met a lot of people. When the children were young, I had no time for a social life. As they got older, I used my spare time to get more work done. I had been out with a few friends of friends, but nothing that was ever going anywhere. Maybe Zoe was right. Okay, I'll try, but I can't promise anything. Good. I'm going home now to start planning a complete redecoration of the house, starting with those photos. She put her hand on my chest. She'll always be right there. You don't need her all over the house. She kissed my cheek, turned and walked away. I watched her go and realized she was right. As long as she was around, I'd never want for a reminder of her mother. I got back to work, picking up leaves and bits of paper, pulling up weeds from the gravel, and changing the flowers for fresh ones. I looked at the gravestone. Beloved wife and mother, it said, and beneath was the epitaph, she chose us. I was about to leave when a soft voice came from behind me. Does it get easier? She asked. I turned and saw a woman in her mid-30s. She was tall and slim with auburn hair down to her shoulders and green eyes. I was lost for words as I feasted my eyes upon her. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to intrude, but I've often seen you here when I come to visit my husband. I don't suppose you've noticed me. I certainly have, but I didn't want to intrude on your grief. You mean like I just did? Oh no. No, you haven't. I was just about to leave. Well, like I said, I've seen you here a lot, and your Victoria has been gone a lot longer than my David. I just wondered how you coped. People tell me it gets easier with time. Is it true? I looked down at my wife's grave, then back to lovely woman before me. Would it be awfully forward of me if I asked you to join me for a cup of coffee? I know a place within walking distance of here, where they sell the best coffee in the county, roasted on the premises. You mean the place in Station Road? Yes, I'd like that very much. As we walked, she told me her name was Jacqueline and her husband was killed in a road accident, having fallen asleep at the wheel. I told her about Vicky and her gradual decline. By the time we reached the coffee shop, all the awkwardness had gone. We ordered and sat down to talk. You obviously still miss Vicky. Tell me, what do you find the hardest part to deal with? The empty bed, I said almost without thinking. I looked at her and suddenly realized how that would sound. Oh, I don't mean the sex, though of course I do miss that. She smiled at me. You mean the looking across the bed and not having someone smile back at you? You mean not having someone there to reach out and touch? I miss having that big, broad back to snuggle up to when I'm feeling small and insignificant. Yes, that's it exactly. Me too. It's not about sex. A woman can get sex anytime she wants it. I've heard some of the young men in the office talking. Jackie must be gagging for it by now, they say, but the truth is I'm not. Plenty of men try it on, even the married ones. I like sex as much as the next woman. Making love to my David took me to places I never knew existed. It wasn't just the sexual excitement, it was being with him. Unless you've been there, you can't understand. I'm half a person without him. Is that how you feel, Vaughn? Does it get better? Yes and yes. That's exactly how I feel, and yes, it gets better, but not much. I was been lucky I had my children to take care of. Until recently, that's taken my mind off of it. But the hole in my life is still there. She looked at her watch. Goodness, is that the time? I must dash. It's been lovely talking to you. I passed her a business card. Here is my number. Call me anytime you want to talk. She took the card and wrote her own number on the back and passed it back to me. I was brought up to believe the man should make the first move. With that, she got up and left. The barista and owner of the shop came over to collect the cups. I'm surprised you two haven't met before. She comes in a couple of times a week, always on her own. I watched her walk away, pulled out my phone and sent a text. Maybe two halves can fit together. Have dinner with me tonight. I saw her stop and pull her phone from her pocket. She looked at the phone, looked back at the coffee shop. She did something with the phone, then turned and continued walking. Moments later, my phone chirped to indicate an incoming text. Call me and ask me properly. Many things have happened in the years since Will's graduation. My consultancy business acquired a large number of high-profile clients, and I had to start looking for more staff. Will has moved to Cambridge after he got a bursary to study for a PhD. Zoe starts her final year at university and has already been offered a place on a voluntary service overseas project, along with a young man she seems to talk about a lot. That will leave myself and my new wife on our own in the house. Yes, I married Jacqueline, and even that wasn't without surprises. 2 weeks before the wedding, the travel agent rang to say that the villa in Menorca that I had booked for our honeymoon was no longer available. However, as their 1 millionth customer, I had won 3 weeks, all expenses covered, in a luxury resort in Mauritius with first-class air travel. They even threw in £1,000 spending money. On the flight home, I was sitting back sipping the complimentary champagne while Jackie played with her iPad. Vaughn, it was Traveler's Choice that paid for all of this, wasn't it? That's the name of the agent I made the original booking with, so I guess so. Why? You'll never guess who owns it. Let's see. It can't be Branson, or it would be called Virgin. It must be someone we've both heard of, or you wouldn't ask me to guess. So the most likely person would be Terence Sanford. That's not fair. I expected a lot more guesses than that. After all, his companies are not renowned for throwing their money around. How did you know? Call it inspired guesswork. She put her head on my arm. I call it being very clever. I'm so glad I chose you. What do you mean? You chose me. Didn't I have any say in the matter? Nope. Women always choose. Men just make themselves available and show what they've got to offer. It's the same throughout nature. The female always chooses and I chose you. In that case, I'm highly honored. So you should be. She giggled. Come to think of it, it was probably his idea of a wedding gift. I'm sure Zoe would have told him we were getting married. Of course, I forgot that you know him. I wonder why not just give it to you. I didn't need to answer. She knew enough to know that I wouldn't have accepted. It annoyed me that he could still get to me, but I had to accept that he was doing his bit to heal the rift. Jackie reached out, took my hand, pulled it to her, and kissed it. Vaughn. I'm 35 now. Do you think it's too late to try for a baby? I don't know, but the trying sounds like a lot of fun. You, sir, are a very naughty man, she said as a smile lit up her face. Isn't that why you chose me? It may have had something to do with it. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.